Nothing about the street looked unusual. People passed by as they always had. Doors opened, doors closed. Footsteps moved on. Noise was constant in Whitechapel. Arguments spilled from open windows. Voices carried through thin walls. Laughter, shouting, crying, all blending together. Most sounds were not treated as warnings. They were treated as background. In a place where distress was common, it did not always signal danger. It signalled life continuing as it always had. People learned what to ignore, what could be explained away, what did not require intervention. Because stopping to question every disturbance would have meant stopping constantly, and most people did not have that luxury. When we look back, knowing what followed, it's tempting to search for signs. A moment that should have stood out. A sound that should have been understood differently. But hindsight sharpens what was once blurred. At the time, nothing seemed wrong. I'm Jenny. I love history and I'm fascinated by the moments where human psychology collides with it in the worst possible ways. In this series, I explore crime through context rather than spectacle, asking not just what had happened, but what kind of world made it possible. This episode is about ambiguity, about the space between something happening and something being recognised. Danger rarely announces itself clearly. More often it arrives wrapped in familiarity. A raised voice mistaken for an argument. A cry dismissed as drunkenness. A disturbance explained away as if it's none of one's business. These interpretations were not careless. They were learned. In Whitechapel, distress was common. Crowding meant that private moments spilled into public space. Thin walls meant that lives overlapped audibly. People adapted by narrowing their attention, not because they lacked empathy, but because constant alertness was unsustainable. Most sounds blended into the rhythm of the street. And once something becomes part of the natural rhythm, it stops demanding a response. Familiarity has a way of softening alarm. When a sound is heard often enough, it loses its sharp edges. A raised voice becomes an argument. An argument becomes routine. Routine becomes something no longer worth noticing. This is not indifference. It is an adaptation. In crowded places, people learn to ration attention. They decide, often unconsciously, what deserves response and what can be ignored without consequence. Most people are not looking for danger. They are looking for normality. And when danger resembles the ordinary, it passes through unnoticed. Whitechapel was full of moments that sat on this edge. Sounds that could mean trouble, or could mean nothing at all. A cry might be fear, or frustration, or even drink. A struggle might be violence, or a disagreement, or something resolved before help could arrive. Without clarity, people filled in the gaps with what they already knew. And what they knew was a neighbourhood where distress was frequent, where shouting was common, where privacy was thin. So the safest interpretation was often the least disruptive one. It's probably nothing. This phrase alone does a lot of quiet work. It reassures. It absolves. It allows life to continue uninterrupted. But it also delays recognition. And delay matters. It's only later that questions begin to form. It is only later that the ordinary is re-examined, a sound replayed in the mind, a moment reconsidered, a decision weighed differently with new knowledge attached to it. Hindsight rearranges meaning. What once felt ambiguous becomes obvious. What once seemed harmless becomes charged with significance. But this clarity belongs to the aftermath, not the moment itself. At the time, people acted with the information that they had, and often that information was incomplete, muffled, or contradictory. Responsibility is easier to assign once an outcome is known. We ask, who should have noticed? Who should have intervened? Who should have understood sooner? But these questions assume a clarity that did not yet exist. In Whitechapel, uncertainty was part of daily life. So was minding one's own business. Intervening carried risks all of its own. Misreading a situation, inviting conflict, drawing attention when none was wanted. For many people, restraint felt responsible. Silence felt prudent. And when nothing appeared to escalate, when the street returned to its usual rhythm, that restraint seemed justified. This is how danger hides. Not in obvious threats, but in moments that resolve themselves. Until one doesn't. Eventually, attention does arrive. Not all at once, but gradually. Through repetition, through patterns, through the slow accumulation of moments that no longer fit comfortably into probably nothing. It is only then that uncertainty hardens into concern. It is only then that the ordinary is reclassified as dangerous. By the time recognition settles in, it feels inevitable, as though the sins had always been there. But inevitability is a story that we tell ourselves afterwards. In reality, what came before was confusion, ambiguity, a series of moments that did not yet demand a response. This is why violence so often escapes early notice. Not because people don't care, but because care is shaped by context. By what is familiar, by what feels survivable, by what can be endured without stopping everything else. In Whitechapel, life continued because it had to. Work resumed, streets filled and thinned, sounds blended back into the background. Until they simply couldn't anymore. This story was never really about a single moment being missed. It was about how many moments can pass without clarity. How danger can exist alongside normality, unrecognised, unremarked, until it demands to be named. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it does show us how easily we can explain things away, until explanation is no longer possible. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and be gentle with what history leaves behind.